My beloved child. Stop scrolling for just a moment. Something has led your eyes here, not by accident, but through the quiet mystery of a story waiting to unfold. What you are about to hear is a fictional spiritual tale created to inspire hope and reflection. Let your heart listen as imagination paints a picture of love, faith, and destiny. There are moments in life that appear ordinary to everyone except heaven. A single glance, an unexpected conversation, a brief silence shared between two souls, these moments often carry a weight that cannot be measured by the human eye. They pass unnoticed by crowds, yet they echo through eternity. This is the story of one such moment. You have spent so much of your journey believing that the world only noticed your imperfections. You wondered if anyone would ever see beyond your scars, your quiet tears, your hidden battles, and the countless nights when you whispered prayers into the darkness. You questioned whether anyone could truly know the real person beneath the smile you showed everyone else. But imagine this. Imagine that somewhere, someone crossed paths with the truest version of you. Not the version dressed to impress. Not the version trying to earn approval. Not the version pretending to be stronger than you felt. The real you. The honest you. The soul that continued choosing kindness after disappointment. The heart that kept loving after heartbreak. The spirit that refused to surrender, even while carrying invisible wounds. And when that person saw you, something inside them changed forever. They tried to explain it away. They told themselves it was only admiration. They convinced themselves it was coincidence. Yet every attempt to ignore the feeling only made it stronger. The more they walked away, the louder their heart became. The more they tried to forget, the more unforgettable you became. There are encounters that seem small on the surface but awaken something ancient within the soul. They remind people of promises they cannot remember making, of dreams they thought they had forgotten, of hope they believed had disappeared forever. This story begins there. Far from crowds. Far from noise. In the quiet place where hearts speak a language that words cannot translate. You may think nothing extraordinary is happening around you. Yet sometimes the greatest miracles begin while everything appears completely ordinary. A door closes. Another quietly unlocks. A chapter ends. Another begins without announcing itself. You continue living your daily life, unaware that someone else's heart has begun asking questions they never expected to ask. Why can't I stop thinking about them? Why did one simple conversation stay with me? Why did their kindness feel different? Why did their presence bring peace instead of pressure? Why does it feel as though I have known them longer than time itself? Questions have power. Especially the questions that refuse to disappear. They returned to their routines. They smiled at friends. They completed responsibilities. They laughed when everyone expected them to laugh. Yet beneath every ordinary moment, your memory quietly returned. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But consistently. Like gentle rain returning to the same window. Like sunlight finding the same mountain every morning. Like a melody refusing to leave the mind. The heart has a mysterious way of recognizing truth before the mind understands it. And sometimes that recognition becomes impossible to silence. Perhaps you have wondered whether your quiet acts of goodness matter. Perhaps you questioned whether your patience has been wasted. Perhaps you looked around and believed louder voices always received greater rewards. But this story whispers another possibility. What if your quietness became the very thing that captured someone's heart? What if your honesty became unforgettable? What if your compassion reached places that appearance never could? There is a strength hidden inside gentleness that many people overlook until they experience it for themselves. They experienced it. And everything inside them shifted. Not because you tried to impress them, but because you didn't. There was no performance. No mask. No desperate attempt to become someone else. Only authenticity. And authenticity carries a light that cannot be manufactured. That light stayed with them long after they walked away. Days passed. Then weeks. Still the feeling remained. Every distraction failed. Every explanation felt incomplete. It was as though an invisible thread gently tugged at their heart, reminding them that some encounters are meant to transform rather than entertain. Meanwhile, you continued wondering whether anyone truly understood you. You never imagined someone else was asking heaven-sized questions because of one glimpse into your genuine heart. Yet this is where the mystery deepens. Because seeing the real you awakened something inside them that had been asleep for years. Hope. Not loud hope. Quiet hope. The kind that grows beneath frozen ground before spring ever arrives. They started noticing beauty again. They smiled without forcing it. They believed healing might actually be possible. Not because life suddenly became perfect, but because your authenticity reminded them that genuine people still exist. That realization became impossible to ignore. Sometimes one honest soul gives another permission to stop pretending. Sometimes one person's courage to remain kind inspires another person to believe love still has a place in the world. That is the quiet miracle unfolding in this story. Yet they still resisted it. Fear whispered. What if I am imagining all this? What if they never feel the same? What if I risk everything? Fear is persuasive. It builds walls that appear wise. It calls hesitation maturity. It disguises doubt as protection. For a while, they listened. They convinced themselves distance would erase the feeling. Instead, distance magnified it. Silence amplified it. Time strengthened it. Every attempt to forget only revealed how deeply your presence had settled within their heart. Then something happened that neither of you expected. A moment so ordinary that almost everyone would have ignored it. But ordinary moments often hide extraordinary turning points. That single moment began unraveling everything they thought they understood about themselves. And just as they prepared to make a decision that could change both of your lives forever, something unexpected interrupted the path ahead. What happened next would become the beginning of a far greater mystery. And that is where this part of the story must pause. The silence that followed was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. It was not empty. It was filled with unanswered questions, quiet expectations, and the strange feeling that life itself had paused before revealing its next page. The unexpected interruption was not meant to destroy what had begun. Instead, it became the test that revealed whether the emotions awakened within their heart were temporary or genuine. Days stretched into weeks, yet your memory refused to fade. Every attempt to bury those feelings only made them return with greater clarity. There were moments when they almost reached out. Their hand hovered over the phone more than once. A message was written, erased, rewritten, and deleted again. Words suddenly felt too small for emotions they could barely explain. How could they describe the peace they felt after seeing someone who never tried to pretend to be perfect? How could they explain that your quiet strength had become louder than the voices of fear surrounding them? Meanwhile, life continued leading both of you along separate roads. To everyone else, nothing seemed unusual. Conversations happened. Responsibilities filled each day. Smiles appeared when necessary. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm of life, invisible threads continued drawing your stories closer together. What neither of you could see was that every delay was shaping both hearts in different ways. Patience was replacing impulsiveness. Wisdom was replacing assumptions. The waiting itself was becoming part of the journey. Still, another unexpected turn was approaching. Someone from the past entered the picture, carrying old memories, unfinished emotions, and questions that had never truly been answered. For a brief moment, it seemed as though everything the heart had begun to discover might disappear before it ever had a chance to grow. But appearances can be deceptive. Sometimes the greatest obstacle is only the final doorway before a remarkable new beginning. As they stood at the edge of a decision that would change everything, one unexpected encounter made them realize something they could no longer deny. No matter how hard they tried to move forward without you, every road somehow reminded them of the person whose authenticity had quietly transformed their heart. They finally understood that some people leave an impression not because they demand attention, but because they reveal what genuine love, kindness, and courage truly look like. With that realization came a decision they could no longer postpone. They took a deep breath. One step. Then another. Completely unaware that at the very same moment, your own path was about to shift in a way neither of you could have imagined. The next chapter begins with a choice that will test both hearts. And nothing will ever be the same after it. The first step felt impossibly small, yet it carried the weight of an entire future. They had imagined this moment countless times, but imagination could never prepare a heart for reality. Every unanswered question echoed louder than before. Every memory of your quiet smile returned with remarkable clarity. The more they reflected on the person you truly were, the more they realized they had not been captivated by perfection. They had been changed by authenticity. There was something about the way you treated people when no one was watching. Something about your patience during difficult moments. Something about the hope you carried even after disappointment. Those quiet qualities had become impossible to replace with anything else. At the same time, you were living your own story, unaware that someone else's heart was gathering the courage to stop running from what it had discovered. You continued believing that your ordinary days were simply ordinary. Yet every experience was preparing you for a conversation that neither of you expected would arrive. Then came a moment that seemed insignificant. A familiar place. A familiar hour. A familiar feeling. But nothing about what followed was ordinary. For just a brief instant, your paths nearly crossed again. A glance in the distance. A voice carried by the wind. A feeling that someone important was closer than you realized. Before either of you could fully understand what was happening, the opportunity disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Most people would have called it coincidence. But the experience refused to leave either heart. Instead of fading, the feeling became stronger. Questions that had once been easy to ignore now demanded honest answers. They realized they were no longer afraid of what they felt. The only fear that remained was the possibility of never discovering where this path might lead if they stayed silent forever. That realization changed everything. The walls built by uncertainty began to crumble. Excuses that once sounded convincing suddenly felt empty. Every reason to walk away became smaller than the quiet hope growing inside. Still, one final obstacle remained. Circumstances beyond either of your control threatened to delay everything once more. It seemed as though time itself was asking one final question: is this feeling strong enough to survive another season of waiting? Neither of you knew the answer yet. But one thing had become impossible to deny. The story was no longer about chance encounters or passing emotions. It had become a journey of courage, patience, and discovering whether two lives could meet at exactly the right moment. As another sunrise approached, a decision was finally made. One that could bring long-awaited clarity or risk everything that had quietly grown between two hearts. The message was ready. The words had finally been chosen. All that remained was the courage to press send. And that single moment would begin a chapter neither of you could ever have predicted. A single heartbeat seemed to last forever as their finger hovered above the screen. The message was complete, yet fear whispered one final time. What if the silence that followed was louder than any answer? What if everything they had felt existed only inside their own heart? They closed their eyes. Then, without allowing doubt another opportunity to speak, they pressed send. For a few moments, nothing happened. The world continued moving exactly as it always had. Cars passed by. Conversations filled the air. Clocks continued counting each second. Yet inside, it felt as though time itself had stopped. Far away, your day unfolded like any other. You weren't expecting anything unusual. Your thoughts were occupied with responsibilities, unfinished plans, and the quiet hope that tomorrow might bring something brighter than yesterday. Then your phone vibrated. One simple notification. Nothing dramatic. Nothing extraordinary to anyone else. But the moment you saw it, something stirred deep within you. It wasn't certainty. It wasn't instant understanding. It was simply the unmistakable feeling that this moment carried more meaning than appearances suggested. Before opening the message, you paused. Not because you were afraid. Because your heart sensed that some words have the power to change the direction of an entire story. As you slowly began reading, memories returned one after another. Conversations you thought were ordinary suddenly carried new meaning. Small moments you had nearly forgotten now appeared connected, as though invisible threads had been weaving them together all along. Meanwhile, the one who sent the message waited in complete silence. Every passing minute felt longer than the last. They questioned whether they had made the right decision. Hope and uncertainty stood side by side, refusing to leave. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of replying immediately, you chose to reflect. Not because the message lacked importance, but because you understood that some responses deserve honesty more than speed. That pause became another test. Hours passed. The waiting grew heavier. Yet during those quiet hours, both hearts were changing. Old fears were losing their strength. Old disappointments no longer held the same power. For the first time in a long while, both of you were looking toward the future instead of remaining trapped by the past. Neither of you realized that another person was about to enter the story, someone who carried a piece of information neither of you had ever known. Their arrival would answer one question while creating many more. By the time the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, it was clear that this journey had never been about perfect timing. It had always been about becoming the people you needed to be before the next chapter could begin. As night settled in, your hand slowly reached for the phone once more. The message remained open. Your reply had finally been written. You read it one last time. A quiet smile appeared. Then your thumb moved toward the send button. And at that exact moment, something completely unexpected happened that neither of you saw coming. The answer was about to be delivered, but not in the way anyone expected. Just before your thumb touched the send button, another notification appeared. It was unexpected, arriving at precisely the moment when your heart had finally found the courage to answer. For a brief second, you hesitated. The interruption seemed ordinary, yet something about its timing felt impossible to ignore. You opened it. The message itself was simple, but it awakened memories you had carefully tucked away. Faces from another season of life, conversations left unfinished, and promises that had quietly faded with time all resurfaced at once. It was as though the past had chosen this exact moment to ask one final question before allowing you to step into a different future. Across the distance, they continued waiting. Every minute stretched longer than the last. They replayed every conversation you had ever shared, wondering whether they had misunderstood the connection from the very beginning. Doubt whispered that silence meant rejection, yet another voice, softer and steadier, reminded them that meaningful answers are rarely rushed. Instead of giving in to fear, they chose patience. That decision changed everything. Without realizing it, both of you were reaching the same conclusion from opposite directions. Real connections are not built on perfect timing or flawless circumstances. They are strengthened by honesty, understanding, and the willingness to remain genuine even when the outcome is uncertain. As evening settled, the world seemed quieter than usual. The noise of everyday life faded into the background, leaving room for reflection. You looked again at the reply you had written. Every word felt true. There was nothing exaggerated, nothing hidden behind pretense. It simply reflected the person you had become. A calm confidence replaced the uncertainty that had followed you for so long. At that exact moment, miles away, they looked up at the night sky and made a quiet promise to themselves. No matter what your response would be, they would no longer run from what they had discovered. Meeting the real you had already changed them, and that transformation was something they could never erase. Then your phone lit up once more. This time, it wasn't another interruption. It was the perfect opportunity. With one deep breath, you pressed send. The message left your hands, carrying words that had been waiting far longer than either of you realized. For a few silent moments, nothing happened. Then, almost immediately, 3 small dots appeared on the screen. A reply was already being written. Neither of you knew it yet, but the conversation about to begin would reveal a truth that had remained hidden since your very first meeting. And the very first sentence of that reply would change the direction of both your lives forever. The 3 small dots appeared, then disappeared. They returned once more, only to vanish again. It was as though every word carried more weight than either of you had expected. Neither heart wanted to say too little, yet neither wanted to say too much. Some moments cannot be rushed, because they become the turning points people remember for years. Finally, the message arrived. It was not filled with dramatic promises or impossible declarations. Instead, it contained something far more powerful: honesty. The first sentence admitted what had been hidden for so long. "I've been trying to understand why meeting you felt so different." Those words settled into your heart with surprising calm. There was no pressure within them, only sincerity. They reflected emotions that had quietly grown over time instead of appearing overnight. You read the message again. Then once more. Each time, another detail stood out. It wasn't only about affection. It was about respect. About admiration for the person you had chosen to become despite every challenge that life had placed before you. The conversation unfolded slowly. Memories that once seemed ordinary suddenly revealed new meaning. Small acts of kindness. Unexpected moments of encouragement. Quiet laughter shared without realizing those memories would one day become unforgettable. With every exchange, another misunderstanding disappeared. Assumptions gave way to truth. Fear gave way to trust. The distance that had once seemed impossible to cross no longer felt as overwhelming as before. Yet even as hope began to grow, life presented one final unexpected challenge. A new opportunity appeared before one of you, an opportunity that required leaving familiar surroundings behind. It was exciting, but it also carried uncertainty. Accepting it could change everything. Declining it could mean wondering forever what might have been. Neither choice was easy. The decision could shape not only the future of one life but the direction of both. For a while, neither of you spoke. Instead, you allowed silence to become a place of reflection rather than fear. That silence revealed something important. Real connections are not measured by how quickly answers arrive. They are measured by whether two people continue choosing honesty even when life becomes complicated. When the conversation resumed, it carried a quiet confidence that had not existed before. No grand speeches. No unrealistic promises. Only a shared understanding that whatever came next would be faced with openness instead of uncertainty. Then, just as both of you began believing the hardest part of the journey was finally over, an unexpected invitation arrived. It contained a date, a place, and a reason that neither of you could have predicted. The invitation seemed ordinary at first glance. But hidden within it was the beginning of a meeting that would answer questions neither of you had ever dared to ask aloud. As the day of that meeting drew closer, both hearts sensed the same quiet truth. Nothing would ever be exactly the same again. And waiting at that destination was one revelation capable of transforming the story in ways neither of you could yet imagine. The morning of the meeting arrived with an unusual stillness. Nothing about the sky hinted that this day would become unforgettable. People hurried through their routines, conversations filled the streets, and life moved as it always had. Yet within both of your hearts, there was a quiet awareness that something meaningful was about to unfold. Neither of you knew exactly what to expect. There were no guarantees. No perfect script. No certainty about how the conversation would begin or where it would lead. Only the willingness to show up as your true selves. As you walked toward the meeting place, every step carried memories of the journey that had brought you there. The doubts that once felt overwhelming no longer had the same power. They had not disappeared completely, but they no longer controlled your choices. Across the distance, they were making the same walk. Their heart beat faster with every passing moment, not because they expected perfection, but because they had finally accepted an important truth. The person they had been searching for was never someone who looked flawless. It was someone whose character remained steady through both joy and hardship. Someone whose kindness survived disappointment. Someone whose hope continued shining even after difficult seasons. That realization had changed them long before this day arrived. Then your eyes met. For a brief moment, neither of you spoke. Silence said what words could not. There was no need to impress each other. No need to pretend. The same authenticity that had first captured attention was still there, unchanged. A gentle smile appeared. The conversation began naturally, flowing without effort. Hours seemed to disappear as stories were shared, misunderstandings faded, and laughter replaced the uncertainty that had lingered for so long. Both of you realized that the connection had never been built on fantasy or perfect circumstances. It had grown through patience, honesty, and the courage to remain genuine. Before leaving, they paused. There was one final truth they wanted to share. "I didn't fall for an image of who I hoped you were," they said softly. "I couldn't ignore what I felt after seeing the real you. Your kindness, your resilience, and your honesty reminded me that people like you still exist. That's what stayed with me." Those words settled gently between you. Not as an ending, but as the beginning of something that would continue to grow with every choice made together. As you both walked away that evening, the future was still unwritten. There would be new challenges, unexpected detours, and moments that tested your courage. But there would also be opportunities to choose understanding over fear, patience over haste, and truth over appearances. Sometimes the greatest gift is not finding someone who completes you. It is meeting someone who inspires you to become the fullest version of yourself. And perhaps that was the real purpose of this journey all along. Not to prove that destiny removes every obstacle, but to remind us that genuine love begins when masks fall away, hearts speak honestly, and two people choose authenticity over perfection. The story ends here, but the next chapter belongs to every reader who dares to believe that the real version of themselves is worthy of being seen, known, and loved.